My name is Michael Bobo. I am a customer success manager here at DocuNav. You probably already know me, or at least a few of you guys do. Um, but today, our solutions engineer, Jessica McColgan, will cover key roles, governance, and adoption strategies you need to grow your Laserfiche environment. Throughout the presentation today, I'll be popping in with a few questions, and I would love for you to chime in via the chat, just because your input makes this typically go a lot better. Just a reminder, the session is being recorded and it will go up on our YouTube channel, so please feel free to share internally as needed. But with that, I do want to get started, and so Jessica, please take it away.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. Today, we are going to shift the conversation from implementing Laserfiche to sustaining and scaling it. So we'll be talking about what that looks like and how to implement that with your organization. So many organizations successfully purchase licenses, stand up a repository, automate a few processes, and then they ask the question, what's next? The answer isn't more technology, it's people. So we're going to be looking at governance and organizational structure. So technology is rarely what limits growth. As adoption expands across departments, we see requests increase, standards become inconsistent, and one or two people become responsible for everything. Organizations that recognize this early see significantly better long-term returns on their investments. Okay, so let's walk through the typical life cycle. Typically, organizations, like we mentioned, buy licenses, they implement the program, they celebrate early wins, and then the departments want more. But suddenly we find that IT is overwhelmed, projects are competing for attention, and priorities become unclear. So this is the natural point where governance becomes necessary. And Bobo, did you want to jump in with questions, or do you want me to?
Oh, yeah, sure thing. So the first question here, and feel free, like I said, to use the chat function. How many people at your organization actually administer Laserfiche? Feel free to just respond with a number, 1, 2, 5. I'd like to see how many people at your org actually, are kind of the go-to person. Okay, I've got 3 ones already. Oh, we've got 2 from Nicole, 1.5 from Mike. Great.
Okay, so something that,
oh, go ahead, Jessica.
Sorry, I can't see you guys on my screen, so Bobo, feel free to interrupt me.
Will do.
So something I do just want to mention is if you've had your enterprise program in place for years and you're feeling stuck, not all hope is lost. So we've seen organizations do a complete rehaul of their strategy and team, even years into owning the program. So if you're not just starting out and you've had it for a while and you already have some things in place, that's okay. It's never too late to go ahead and put measures in place to help increase the growth. And so that's really just what we want to focus on with you guys today. All right, so who owns Laserfiche? Who approves and prioritizes new projects? Who trains users? Who maintains standards? If the answer to every question is our admin, then you're already feeling the growing pains. So in order to scale consistently, we need to have a better plan in place. And so I know that Bobo asked this, but if you guys are the wearer of all hats in your organization, I'm sure you're already feeling those growing pains. And honestly, you guys deserve a round of applause for that. Seriously, it's a lot of work. So let's look at how we can get you guys to a better system. So the very first thing is, how do we actually get the ball rolling? Executive sponsorship is critical because it secures funding, it removes roadblocks, and it aligns Laserfiche with the organizational goals. But how do we actually get that buy-in? Most organizations that we talk to are out of compliance. Typically, there are fireproof vaults that are a state requirement for stored documents, and most of the time we see that organizations are at risk based on this factor alone. Additionally, we find that organizations are failing audits because of lost documentation, unmet standards, or missing or expired retention policies. So going digital with records and having a well-organized system and team really helps to eliminate most of these issues. Paper storage is reduced, which typically saves thousands in costs per year. Documents are trackable, auditable, and publicly accessible as needed. So overall, we see that efficiency is increased and institutional knowledge is protected. These are some of the main contributing factors for securing that executive buy-in within your organization. All right, so every successful implementation needs a champion, someone waking up every day thinking about Laserfiche. This person keeps momentum going, coordinates departments, communicates wins, secures the budget, and ensures the platform continues to evolve. Seriously, you just need someone who loves Laserfiche and is pushing this out across your organization. If you don't have a Laserfiche champion, honestly, this is going to be your biggest hurdle.
And so I did have another question for the chat here. Um, if something were to break within your environment or within your system, would you say there's one person or a team of people that, users typically look for the fixes, for the answers? You can type one or maybe two if there's a team or multiple people that you'd reach out to. All right, a lot of ones.
All right. Well, let's take that information and look at our recommended team structure. Now, keep in mind that this is just our kind of best recommendation based on what we've seen successfully implemented across organizations that have that growth in governance and are seeing the highest return on their investment overall. So, first of all, we have that executive sponsor. This is the person who provides that vision and funding, which I know we all have budgets. So this is the important piece is you need to have a sponsor who's going to actually be funding the program for your organization. And then we have that program owner. That is the person who is actually driving the strategy for your organization. The administrator is the one who should be actually managing the platform, and then your developers are helping to actually build out the solutions and train your users on the processes that have been built. And then you should have a department champion. And this is as you're expanding into your organization. Each department should have its own champion. And that person is going to be the one that's gathering requirements, helping train those end users, and encouraging adoptions. Now, most of the time, again, what we see is typically there is a single admin, like you guys mentioned, that most of you are, that is wearing all of these hats. But again, if we're looking at expanding our platform and really implementing this in the best way possible, this is our recommended team structure. And then, of course, if you have resources, additional, having a help desk or some kind of support platform that's a go-to for users that need help with any part of the system would be the final missing piece of this. And this would really be seen once everything is kind of really built out and fully implemented. And this process that we're talking about is not how you start your program. We see this built out over years and years and years and years of growing and expanding. So, like we mentioned earlier, if your team only has a single admin who's wearing all of these hats, then you're going to eventually see the system start to break down. Small organizations and some large ones that we see with early adoption often combine roles. And again, that's okay initially, but as adoption grows, the responsibilities should become specialized so the organization doesn't depend on one individual. So as you grow, you should see those responsibilities become shared, and then eventually you should see those responsibilities be dedicated to specific roles within the organization itself. Remember, governance does not slow projects down. Governance makes the projects repeatable and efficient. So we need to define who owns the repository design, the security, workflow standards, naming conventions, change management, and project prioritization. Typically, what we've seen is that the information systems team owns these, but individuals within that team work together to maintain the structure of standards. Now, you guys probably know that DocuNav does offer training for your team and users. And one of the big things that we talk about in these trainings is how to implement our best practices for design and standards. And that comes down to how we name workflows, how we name variables within those workflows, very specific parts of your design to help maintain standards.
And then, Jessica, I did have another question here for the chat. Of the 6 roles on this slide, how many would you say are covered at your org? What do you feel really confident in? What do you feel like there might be a gap within your current organization? Feel free to type your answers in the chat. Okay, Mike Smith, we have a gap in prioritization. Yep. That's pretty common. A lot of different things that organizations want to do, but what do they do first?
Yep, that is a big one that we see, and we'll talk about that a little bit later too. Is determining kind of where to start when you're implementing those. But if you, to that point, if you don't have someone who's helping to prioritize your projects, if you don't have someone leading that role in your organization, you are going to see a bottleneck. And it's never a bad thing to have so many projects waiting that need to get done. That's great. Job security, right? We're growing. That's wonderful. But if you don't have someone who's able to take on that role and say what needs to be prioritized, then we see a slowdown in the system.
Mhm. John and Nicole both adding workflow standards, right? Maintaining those workflow standards throughout the entire year. And then John also adds project prioritization. So it sounds like those 2 are the biggest right now.
Yep, those are big ones. Great feedback.
Cool.
Okay.
Thanks, chat.
All right. So something that we are often asked is, should departments within our organization control their own processes? My answer to you would be that departments should absolutely have input, but enterprise standards should come from one central team. Otherwise, you'll end up with duplicate workflows, inconsistent security, and maintenance headaches. So, for example, we've seen where departments, specific departments within the organization, want to train on and create their own digital processes. While this seems like a great idea initially, it often becomes too complicated for the departments to handle. They have a lot going on with their daily tasks, and we've seen this create a bottleneck for process implementations. And then, kind of like we touched on the previous slide, when departments are in charge of their own processes, you do lose that consistency across workflow, forms, and repository design. So, again, it does sound like a great idea. As you expand and grow, you could potentially have that department champion that is trained specifically on your set standards in order to create those processes and designs. We see in our larger organizations that sometimes that is very successful, but typically what we see is having a central team is the most important step. They're the ones implementing those standards and consistency before you decentralize and go into the individual departments. So, um, as a best practice, what we recommend is having the departments submit their ideas along with all those necessary requirements, but keep that central team who can build out and actually implement the solutions. So, some real examples of pitfalls that we have seen with clients. Typically, one admin doing everything. And you guys, mentioned that a lot of you are doing that. So, what we see is it just becomes too much. We see burnout with that admin or not being able to finish an implementation because projects are all over the place. We also see a lot of turnover with that admin. And so you're constantly having to retrain and relearn on the entire system, and all of that is put on one person. We also see issues with shadow IT. This means that users are given too much security, so they can go in and change settings or processes, and technology is not being made aware of what that is. So that is something that we definitely want to avoid in the system. That's why access rights are so important when we do talk about implementing these solutions with you guys. And then inconsistent naming conventions, duplicate solutions, and undocumented processes that disappear when employees leave. So, again, a big part of our training with clients is the consistency in naming processes and variables. We also encourage you to add notes into your processes. This is a really important piece that often gets missed. And as turnover happens within the organization, someone comes in and now we're having to puzzle piece information together. How do these processes talk to each other? What is it doing? We're having to break it down. It just gets really confusing. And of course, the biggest thing that you guys touched on is those competing priorities. So, a single admin is getting input across many different departments. And overall, this just makes implementation much more difficult. Or they're giving other duties as assigned, which I know is our favorite job description line, and projects fall through the cracks. So, again, these are the biggest pitfalls that we see. That competing priorities does keep coming up as the biggest issue. So, having someone within your organization to help alleviate these pitfalls is going to help overall your program expand and become more successful.
And I'm curious for those, those participants, what would you say is the biggest pitfalls? We've talked about competing priorities. I'm curious if there's another item on this list or one that might not even be on this list that you've run into.
Okay. So let's talk about how do we actually fix this. So, what we're talking about is building a center of excellence. Now, a center of excellence is not necessarily a new department, it's just this governance model that we keep talking about and coming back to. So, this governance model is providing those standards, those templates, those reusable components, training, best practices, and a roadmap for your enterprise growth. So, one thing that we mention a lot of times when we're looking at digital processes is creating an initial template for your organization that includes all of the initial metadata lookups, field roles, all these things that you have on pretty much every single form that you want applied within your organization. That is just one very small thing that we can do to help ingrain those development standards, so that we're not starting. Every department doesn't have their own processes that they're building out. So a template is a really good example of that. Having those reusable components when we get into the more advanced workflows, we have workflows that are calling the same workflows, so we're implementing the same processes. And then again, having those best practices for how we name our workflows, how we name our variables, making sure that we're including notes in our processes, whether that's within workflow or forms, so that someone coming in behind us knows exactly what that process is doing. Now, I know just as well as everyone else that as you're building out a process, you don't want to necessarily put notes in and say exactly what each step is doing. I get it. It gets tedious. It is super helpful. At the bare minimum, we recommend that you're at least naming each step in a concise way. Again, that set of standards, so that it's very clear what the process is doing. The biggest piece helping with our standards is training. Training for you guys, training for your end users, making sure that you do have resources available for your users so that they know how the system works. Um, with our larger organizations, we see that once a process is implemented for a department, documentation for that process is typically created so that the department knows what the process is doing and how to actually use the process. And that's all part of that training piece. So that's a very, very big piece of our Center of Excellence governance model that we're looking at here. Excuse me. So, when should you be hiring dedicated staff? If it's an option, right from the get-go, but most organizations don't go in with a dedicated team in mind. So, as the implementation grows, so does the team. So, we start by training existing employees. Most likely, you already have someone in your organization who would fit these roles perfectly. They already know the processes, they already know the end users, and they can be trained to help with implementation as needed. So we always recommend that you look at who is already around you within your organization that can fill that role. Now, outsourcing is for more complex implementations, such as repository setup, complex forms and workflows, and then training as well. Now, there isn't one right answer on how and when to actually implement your staffing strategy. Honestly, it just depends on the organizational maturity and the workload of your organization and projects. So we've seen this done a ton of different ways across organizations, whether you're starting out with a team, whether you expand as the program grows. And most of you can probably attest to you started out as the single admin for your organization, and years later, you may still be the only admin for your organization, which again, I know gets really taxing. Um, and not everyone always has the budget in order to have those additional roles that we're talking about, which really help to implement that governance. However, again, if you have someone around you within your organization that you can go ahead and train to help you in these certain roles and help implement these standards, then that's where we start seeing more success with the projects overall. Technology adoption happens through people. So we want to empower department champions. We want to celebrate those quick wins, provide training, publish our success stories, and create repeatable onboarding for new departments. The organizations that see the greatest return aren't always necessarily the ones with the largest budget. They're the ones that invest in the right people, that have clear ownership, and a governance model that supports that long term growth, like we talked about. So, something that is really kind of quick and easy to do within your organization um, is to celebrate those wins and publish your success stories internally. Now, this can be as as fancy as having the process put on your organization's webpage, talking about the new process and the design. But honestly, word of mouth does go a long way when we look at driving adoption across the organization. You win a department, they start talking about how great their process is and how excited they are about it. They tell other departments, and then we see things just start expanding and growing and growing. Okay, so let's look at a school district implementation, for example. Again, the first thing we have to have is that buy-in and support. So when we're talking about that executive sponsorship, we most often see the program sponsored by, for example, the superintendent of schools or the school board. Now, in larger organizations, larger school districts, we can see this sponsorship be at the department level. But in smaller schools, typically you need to get buy-in from your superintendent. And again, like we touched on earlier, compliance is incredibly important. So, getting the uppermost executives to understand this and see the cost benefit of having digital records, of having digital processes, really helps get the project off the ground and rolling. Your dedicated champion can be anyone in the district, but it needs to be someone who is the face of the program. So, again, that's your champion. It's someone you want who just absolutely loves what you guys are doing and is constantly talking it up, reaching out to departments, and getting buy in. So, from clients that we typically work with, we've seen this be anyone from the records manager to the head of IT to the finance manager to the warehouse manager, and so on and so forth. So, think of this person as the program's biggest fan. And then from there, we want to let our champion build a team. So, in a perfect ideal world where no one had to worry about budgets, we'd recommend that you start with a minimum team of 3 people and expand from there. So you need someone to manage the team. Again, this is most often your dedicated champion. You need someone to dive in and do the training, build the forms and the workflows. And that would be your developer. And then you need someone to help with support, and whether that be on the technology side of things, with end users, or with translating needs between the departments. And then, of course, we need our department power users. So, what we typically want to do is start with the department that complains the most, honestly. If you can win them over, they will be your biggest supporters. And like I mentioned, word of mouth travels fast, especially within school districts. So if you can solve a big problem within a department, they will start telling other people and they will start asking for more. They'll start talking to other departments about how to implement their processes digitally as well, and it expands and grows from there. Typically, again, with these departments within our school district example, we see that the process isn't internal within just that department. That department typically at some point in their process needs input or approvals from other departments or principals or campus admin. And so that kind of helps expand a little bit already. And then again, as that process gets implemented, they get excited about it. It just keeps growing and growing from there.
And Jessica, before we wrap up here, I did want to ask one more question for the participants. Um, in one word, what is the biggest thing standing between you and getting more out of your Laserfiche? Is it, budget, um, leadership buy-in or buy-in? I said one word. Is it bandwidth? What's one thing that's standing in the way? Okay, we've got budget already. Automation, interesting. Training, buy-in. Right, training's got 2 likes. Good to see. This is great for us to know.
Yeah. And one thing with training, again, there's always more than one way to do things, right? Some of our clients do a train the trainer approach. So we will come in and we will train like you guys as, the admin or that champion of the program. And then it's up to you guys to actually train the end users. Now, if you're the only one, again, wearing that administrative hat, we understand that that's a lot for you guys. Something that we see that is pretty successful is letting us come in and train your end users. So I'm sure most of you know, but we do have some quick start guides that are available to all of you to share out with your end users to help them navigate some of the very beginning stages of using the program. And then as your program expands or you have processes put into place, then we can do additional trainings with your end users to really help get into, the nitty gritty of your specific process and allow them to ask questions and have, more of a hands-on experience so that they're actually walking through it step by step. And we see that that implementation training plan is more effective than just sending them a guide and, saying, here, good luck. So,
Right.
that
Yeah,
is
and
great information for us to have.
Jessica, that's a great call out. I do just want to reiterate, as your VAR, as your Laserfiche partner, our role is really just to help with adoption, whether that's Laserfiche or post implementation. We want to be able to come on site and train as much as you'd like, or virtually if you'd like to record that and share internally as well. And so, I just want to make sure that everyone on this call knows, as your Laserfiche partner, it's something that we offer and encourage. So, sorry, Jessica, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, no,
I'll get
you're
off my
good.
soapbox now.
No, you're good. That is great, Bobo. And also kind of to that point, even if you've had your program implemented for years, um, we know that there's a lot of turnover typically within organizations. Hopefully there's not, but we do see that. Um, but we do have clients come back and say, hey, we've had this implemented for, 10 plus years and we don't know how any of it works. What do we do? And so we're able to go in and really help sit down and even pull in the end users for, trainings and one-on-one sessions by department. So just because you've had this in place for years does not mean that you cannot utilize our training resources that we do offer to you guys. So please make sure that you're using that so that the program doesn't lose traction as you guys are trying to grow and expand. Okay, so our key takeaways here. Remember, Laserfiche is an enterprise program, not simply a software implementation. So the organizations that do achieve the greatest success are the ones who are investing in people, governance, they have that executive sponsorship, and they have continuous improvement. And again, that goes back to that training piece. So, um, like Bobo mentioned, we are here to help you guys. We want to see you expand and grow. So anything that we can do to help with that, we're here. So that being said, I want to open it up now for any questions that you guys may have for me or the team that we can help answer.
Doesn't look like I'm seeing anything in the chat. Jessica, you just knocked out of the park. No questions needed, I guess. Um,
Love
but
it.
if there is anything that you need in the meantime, or just need answers to any questions that come up, please feel free to reach out to your Laserfiche or DocuNav CSM. You can also reach out directly to me. But we do have one question from Nicole. Most of the question, or I'm so sorry, it doesn't look like a question after all. So we really do appreciate your participation in the chat. And like I said, if there is anything that comes up, please don't hesitate to reach out. And as a reminder, this has been recorded. Please feel free to share internally with anyone I think that you think might be it might be beneficial to see this recording. But I hope everyone has a great rest of your day, rest of your week. And Jessica, thank you. Good job. And we appreciate you.
No problem.